The European Union confirms the Philippines will no longer accept new EU grants, pegged at around 250 million euros or 13.85 billion pesos. The EU says the Philippine government relayed a decision only this week. President Rodrigo Duterte has repeatedly slammed the EU for supposedly interfering in his bloody anti-drug campaign. Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea says the new policy stops the EU from interfering with our internal affairs. Medialdea says, quote, "We're supposed to be an independent nation." The EU Parliament earlier warned the Philippines that it could lose trade incentives if the human rights situation in the country does not improve. EU Ambassador to the Philippines Franz Jessen said that the EU was not imposing human rights conditions on the Philippines. He reminded Philippine officials that the country is signatory to 27 labor and human rights conventions under the United Nations system. The EU is one of the Philippines' biggest donors. The Philippine economy grew by 6.4% in the first quarter of 2017, lower than the previous quarter. The Philippine Statistics Authority says the 6.4% GDP growth is lower than 6.6% growth during the last quarter of 2016 and 6.8% in the same period a year ago. GDP is the total amount of final goods and services produced in a country. Despite the decline, the 6.4% growth in the gross domestic product places the Philippines ahead of Asian nations that released their GDP figures for the first quarter. Countries in Asia that released GDP figures are Indonesia at 5.01%, Thailand 3.3%, South Korea 2.7%, Taiwan 2.56%, and Singapore 2.5%. China, Vietnam, and Malaysia have not announced first quarter GDP growth figures yet. The United States Department of Justice names a former head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation as special counsel to lead the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election and possible collusion with President Donald Trump's team. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein taps Robert Mueller, a widely respected figure who headed the FBI for the decade after the 9/11 attacks, to take over the FBI's probe of Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election. Trump is accused of seeking to stall the politically explosive probe following his dismissal of former FBI Chief James Comey and allegations that he asked Comey to drop his investigation of a former aide. The move comes as pressure mounted in Congress for an independent probe into ties between Trump's campaign and Moscow. A special counsel is empowered to conduct the investigation independent of the Justice Department hierarchy, with a dedicated staff of his choosing. The special counsel is also authorized to prosecute any crimes unearthed by the investigation.